Everyone again. My goodness, lighting here is always weird, but welcome back to Growing Up Alien. So today is kind of a wild story, I suppose. I got a lot of my memories back concerning the my lab experiences and what was happening in Maynard, Sudbury, and sort of Lancaster, Shirley area, which is really actually all connected to a base called Fort Devens. My father and both my mother and my father worked at Fort Devens. So I was able to kind of cobble together reasonably easy to follow dictation because I can't think in a straight line. So I just want to I have all this like download, I just hand it over. So I have to kind of like how can I speak in a language and where people would be able to understand it. So I'm gonna do that. So this is stuff that went on when I was a kid. So the Fort Devens Turner Jump area. So that fenced off government facility. I'm going to show some pictures of that. I took it today. I just went there today and took some of the pictures from the outside. Always kind of freaked me out in a way when I was a kid driving by there. We would go there um, to go into Leominster and a few other local areas. But this acreage, this base training area that was part of Fort Devens. I believe it is still part of Fort Devens. So Fort Devens also had a training facility in Sudbury, which they annexed, and then Raytheon had several. Well, actually, they had several facilities. Woburn, I think they had one in Woburn, Waltham. That was connected to the Assabet Mill building. That's in Maynard, and it's an old brick factory complex, and Digital was there, and then Raytheon bought space there. But what happened was underground, and that was connected to bases in Sudbury underground, which of course they'll never tell you. It's really creepy if you try to find out anything. If you just do some Google searches on the Raytheon in Maynard, you won't find anything on it, really. There's a few things here and there, but very little. So I'd have to go to the Maynard Library to see what's up. But Massachusetts, for a small state, got a lot of military funding, particularly during the hot period of the 80s and 90s. And we had a massive amount of technology that was drawing in all kinds of people here to this area. Close to my area, actually. So it's maybe an hour west of Boston. So that's like the 490. There's like a belt around Boston. And yeah, so my father also worked in Waltham. There was I just might still be there, but a military complex there. So really, it's interesting to see the fact that really not a lot of interest has been placed here in New England. I think they got away with a lot. All of your New England states have access to these underground bases. So yeah, they would take me there to Maynard mostly, but I also think I went to Fort Devens. There's so MIT's Lincoln Lab. So there's kind of it's almost a circle really. So you have Fort Devens, Hanscom Air Force Base, MIT's Lincoln Lab. Lincoln Lab and MIT were heavily influenced and sort of propped up by the military. That's known. Then it loops again over to the Sudbury Maynard area. But that's kind of the complex. There was also activity. I mean, there's activity all over Massachusetts. There was some more activity up in the North Shore as well. But that's definitely where they were doing black operations. So I'm gonna cut into a screen share. I mean, the AI pictures, they're okay. They're quite what I remember, but I guess as close as we can get. And goal of this transmission today is to assist people and maybe triggering some of their memories if you are from New England or if you've experienced some possible situations like this in different parts of the world, basically. It's not just here in the United States. So I'm gonna bring up some images and see how that, what that can do for our viewers. So it takes me a bit to get the screen share rock and roll here. So is share. All right. So this is gonna have to cut forward to where we want it, which is here. cutting forward. I'm just gonna go back a screen. I like to kind of do all my photos on a thing like this easier. So the first thing here is the type, something like this. And the AI gave it, I'm gonna, let's make sure it's a kind, does it say here I'm putzing. No, we don't want to show, we don't need that. We want to use just the AI. All right, there we go, because it's easier. These are the tall grays that they were using. I don't remember ever coming into contact with the small grays that people generally experience. Now the AI gave it like a human mouth. They don't have a human mouth, but because the military were unable to actually access the abilities that I had, the psionic abilities that I have, they called in the tall grays, and they weren't able to do it either. This actually is interesting because it answered the question that I had, which was when I was abducted. They couldn't do anything. So the rest of the story is they couldn't do anything here. So that's why they brought in Solar Warden and sent me up. When I was up on the Solar Warden ship, that's where they brought in the tall gray. Oh, I only saw one. There's probably was more, I'm sure. But what he had told them was a lie, because I remember him talking about, oh, this one's a hell. This one's Pleiadian. It's no good. You got to get rid of it. And I remember the military was like, well, no, we were trying to, this one's got some secret sauce we want, and we can't access the secret sauce. So the tall gray, I guess, see, the thing was that they couldn't access it either. And that made me a very dangerous non-asset for them, for the Deep State Alliance. So the tall gray, rather than, I guess, admit, I'm just guessing on this point what he was thinking, but he lied to the military in saying that I had to be, removed because I'm just worthless trash. Because I remember being like, wait a minute, the hell are not worthless trash. We're hot star bunnies. What's wrong with you, right? So that's what he was saying, was that because they couldn't access the psionic ability that I had, that I was a very dangerous threat to not only the timeline but their plans. So he wanted to get me removed, killed, so that I couldn't do what I'm doing now, basically. So but the military were like, no, they didn't get it, so they're kind of like, oh yeah, no, we're not going to do that. Of course, we were then boarded by the GFW, and everything was, everybody was really, now, well, I wasn't the only one on the ship that night. But let's see, moving forward here to the next frame. Me putzing with the tech. That's here somewhere. There it is. These are not AI. These are actually photos I took today. This was Lancaster, Massachusetts. This is one of the back sections of this. It's almost over 200 acres, almost 200 acres, I think. It's big for Massachusetts. I know if you're out west, you're like, that's not. But in Massachusetts, that's a lot. But this is the back section. And it's all this high fencing and everything. And these are just some pictures I took today. Rainy New England day. And that's what you'd see at that area. So I did a short as well. This is the map of where the Turner Drop Zone, Fort Devens. So you can see the area there. You can go on Google Maps and, explore it. So moving forward. Next image. So this, I got a square over where the Raytheon section is on the Mill Buildings complex. This is Maynard. And yeah, there was, I live in an area where, in the 18th century, 19th century, because New England's old, so there were a lot of wool, linen, carpet mill industries. So the town that I live in was known for coach lace, which was the lace they would use on the windows of coaches, coach lace, and that was in the 18th century. But the next town in Lancaster. So when the woolen mill, this is not Lancaster, but this is in Maynard, about half an hour, 25 minutes from me. So after the woolen mill, the Assabet Mill was called, finally shut down in 1950. A Worcester-based group of businessmen bought the property in July of 1953. And now, in the 50s, it's kind of a hot time. for the industrial military complex to start its partying. So, and it began leasing it as office and manufacturing space. So this was is a large brick mill complex, typical New England mill complex. So this is so rare to see this mentioned. This is Wikipedia, as a matter of fact. Major tenants included Raytheon and Denison Manufacturing Company and Digital Equipment Corporation. So when Digital moved in 1957, I think Digital had a lot to do with sort of hand in hand there with Raytheon. They're kind of, you scratch my back, I scratch yours kind of thing. So they rented the space and the company grew until it bought the entire complex and blah, 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 right? But so Maynard was nicknamed the mini computer capital of the world. And DEC, which is the digital company, remained in Maynard until 1998 when it was purchased by Compaq, which itself later bought out by Hewlett Packard in 2002. So that is the mill facility where the Raytheon was on the surface, not underneath. So a lot of these are like smoke and mirror places too. But I remember the Raytheon sign. So underground, this AI seemed pretty, accurate to what I would have seen because I'm terrified of anyone. I have a real problem. There's some like for me, it's like my body is split. There's like my body, and then there's my mind. And my mind is analytical and my body is not. And they're like there's like a fight. I almost like split. So when I see anybody like in a laboratory setting or like I get really nervous, bothers me. People in military outfits also bother me. I get kind of stressed out. Even though my father was in the military, like the outfit itself was a problem. And generally just humans themselves kind of like I have a reaction to that, to seeing them. I have a big reaction to being touched. I have like my body just cringes. And my body like will run into fight or flight almost instantly, like even if I hear human voices. So I'm going to break this up into a few sections because they also trauma bonded me with a friend of mine called Patrick, and he has a lot of similar issues. So it's like, fine, I don't want to give me his name, but yeah, I've been trying to get him on the show because he was taking the Lincoln Lab. So um, that's pretty close to what they're such jerks too. They have that really nasty I don't know. It's almost sadistic, cold, calculating. It really was a really weird experience for sure. Let me picture. So this was pretty accurate. This is an AI of what the tunnel systems looked like. I remember walking and being, of course, drugged and wheeled down a lot of these tunnel systems. So that's actually pretty familiar to me, and it might be familiar to some other folks. Who are watching this. So one of the things that I was curious about was, what did they want? Why did they want my psionic ability? What was the deal there? So I didn't experience the same kind of violent SSP, maybe MyLab type stuff that a lot of other people did. They really didn't do a whole lot with me other than try to access this sort of to collect. I don't know what they were going to do with it. My, you know, almost like a mind control power. So they wanted to weaponize that. And it was really like, so it has something that they said they were trying to, it's like, it's so hard to describe this kind of stuff because you're like, what in the ever loving, but now I understand what they were doing. I finally got the pieces put together where it made sense to like what they wanted. So you and me and all of the Star Season envoys, came in with particular there was one of the guys in our group calls it X-Men. Yeah, we are. I mean, everybody's an X-Man. But we came in with certain X-Men traits that they wanted that obviously the benevolent extraterrestrials and our because we're here to liberate Earth and get rid of all this stuff armed us with. Of course, the other side knew that, and that's why a lot of, if not all, of the envoys and star seeds were taken into these MyLabs. So what they wanted to do was manipulate and control the harmonic transmissions that is my psionic, ability. So I can use frequency, which I do now. I can use frequencies to heal, to change emotions in animals and people. And it's there's something, even though I don't like the sound of my voice, but they added it to my voice. So there's frequencies in my voice, and there's a frequency emitted from my wouldn't be really my physical form, but in a way you would be my physical form, but it's my consciousness. I guess that's the best way to describe that. There's an electrical frequency that I emit that affects animals or people that are around me, and it's benevolent. It's Pleiadian. It's meant to be benevolent. It's meant to raise the feeling, make people feel good, whatever, right? A sound, a frequency that makes people feel good, calms them down. What the military wanted to do, which is why I was like, well, why would they want that? Because that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Because like they're not, that's a healing thing. And they're like, yeah. So what they wanted to do was collect it and distort it and turn it into a negative thing. So the fact that I could, so basically here's the simple way of explaining it for me. So they wanted to take the frequency I emit and make it negative, so that instead of it making people feel good, it would make them feel nervous or anxious or angry or something like that. So the fact that I can change people's emotions is what they wanted to do. So they tried to get it out of me using some trauma, which I don't remember yet. I'm not sure what that was, and I know I was sexually assaulted, so it might have been that partially, but I'll have to dive more into what kind of trauma they used. I don't remember. All I remember right now is the tech they used to try to pull it out. So what the goal would have been, had they been able to collect this thing, was to then reprogram it or me, my emotional emissions, so that I would then broadcast what they wanted as a weapon, which would have been, fear, get people to be compliant, zombies, maybe to create apathy, depression, get people to become more malleable for them. So what I would have been is probably like, I don't know if I would have been aware of it. I'm not sure because they never got that far, but they would have can use me as sort of a broadcast to suppress humanity. That's what they were hoping for. So if there was a crowd that they wanted to activate me in, right? So if, say, there was a protest crowd or something that was happening, I would broadcast without doing anything, just through the frequency that comes off of me, whatever they wanted. Maybe they wanted to have the crowd become submissive. Maybe they wanted the crowd become more aggressive, whatever. So they tried messing around with my DNA through genetic extraction, and they wanted to use it in hybrid programs. And what they had collected was what they actually wishes was, that's what confused the military, because they wanted the Ahel genetic structure that was encoded. And that's why the military was confused when the tall gray was like, oh, it's Pleiadian. You don't want that. It's junk. When the military is like, well, no, it's not junk. That's what we want. They know. So they took stuff from me, of invasive, eggs and all that stuff. And, they took bone marrow and blood and whatever, which is why I have a real serious problem with anything like that. Yeah, just walking into, like, I won't use any modern medicine, obviously, but just walking in any place like that, I go into like full fight or flight, like panic. Yeah. Um, I can't actually lay on my back. Certainly not around any humans. I can't, people lay down. I can't do that. I remember when I was a kid, they used to do naps in class. I know, my God. I was like horrified. It was just like, oh my God. So like there's a lot of stuff that makes sense now to my hypervigilance and like severe fear response that I have to a lot of things involving humans. So they were hoping to use this in either in clones or again in hybridization programs. They were hoping to be able to insert it in other humans that they had enhanced like a super soldier, but it didn't work. For whatever, I'm not actually, it had a key that was in it, and that was the thing that even the tall grays couldn't break. Um, and that's what protected it. Because I mean, you have to understand this. When we were inserted here onto this planet to do our job in this war, it's a war, folks, right? So when we were inserted here as soldiers, the different galactic federations and the intergalactic federations that whoever were working with you, particularly, they gave you these X-Men abilities, but at the same time, they knew that you would probably be taken by the enemy and they would want to use those things. So they had to kind of protect it. And they did. They had some very, very strong keys that they used around these abilities that you have. And I don't like to use words like X-Men, even though it's just for the cooler fun here, because this is galactic. This is not anything that is unique. And that's where people have to kind of become aware. That is a deep state concept that superpowers, right, either don't exist or it makes you special because this doesn't. This is you are in a galactic war. Earth is a planet in the solar system in the galaxy. So everyone is an extraterrestrial to someone. So this is just the way we work. This is reality. It's not a movie, folks. It's real. And it's super important that you remember right now, as one of our commanders says, this is a war of remembrance right now. You need to remember who you are and what you are here to do and what skills you have. So this is what they did, they wanted us all to make ourselves small. That's the way you were raised on this planet because they knew, the bad guys knew, right? Make yourself small because you don't want to, upset other people. But that's not correct. So this is, what you need to go deep inside yourself at this point and find out and look back at what your past here on this planet and what you were able to do. Okay. So for me, they were trying to create a frequency weapon. But the way that this code frequency, electromagnetic, whatever it is, thing was tuned into a natural harmonic, which would only be used in forms of like, and I can see it energetically. I know what it looks like, but trying to explain an energy is really hard. I can see the light code of what it looks like. It's like something like it's sort of like a controlled fountain binary code type thing. And it exists in kind of an interdimensional space, but it moves back and forth. What they wanted to do was isolate this frequency, and it's a pattern, right? So they wanted to isolate this frequency pattern by sort of torturing me, basically, so they could then develop those resonance weapons that they wanted. It was basically, they would use it for a couple of things, like energetic weaponry, sonic weaponry, and mind frequency weaponry. That is what they were hoping to do. So I remember maybe I was like 5 or 6, and I was in the going down this tunnel system you see here. And that was like that was cement. And there was someone, it was a steel. I was sitting up on a steel gurney, I guess what you call it. Something like you'd see in a morgue, really, that kind of thing. And that they were just like you saw in the other picture. There were men in military. I didn't remember seeing any women. And there were like scientist people in the white lab coats. I was being pushed actually by someone in a lab coat, probably a technician, more than the ones that were going to try to extract this stuff. So I was actually tied. My hands were tied to this steel gurney. I was drugged at this point because I don't remember really being frightened, but I could still see what was going on. Um, and I remember them talking about that, why they had restrained me because they didn't want me to, and drugged me because they didn't want me to start affecting them, I guess. That's kind of what I got. So then they took me into this other area. I'll try to pull up this picture somewhere here. And this is AI, so it didn't look whole. I mean, it looked something like this but the room was white. It wasn't cement. And there were lights like that, junk lights. It's kind of weird the way they would set up these things. And there was a viewing window there, and that's actually accurate. There was a viewing window, I remember, on that side because I was actually facing it, as you see in this picture here. The machines and stuff the AI created, it didn't look like that. And that's like they're I don't know, they're too involved in sci-fi, I think. But the room was white, very clinical, very clean, very sterile. And there was maybe 3 or 4 people there, no ETs, in a viewing window that was only the one way. You couldn't see out, but they could see in. And that was where they were going to try to get these codes. So they did things not all at once. They would try 1 or 2 things and then try something else. I think that's what they were doing. So this one in particular, I remember they wanted to access by some kind of bio emission fields they were talking about. So psi weaponry. They would call it bio emission fields, but it was also called psi weaponry. And these frequencies they could then weave to their liking. So they could take it and then I don't know if they're going to put it in a computer or what, but some kind of device, some kind of technological device, some artificial thing that they were going to use to then broadcast to direct thought on the population. So basically like thought weapons, frequency weapons that they could do remotely. And I remember them saying something like a consciousness disruption thing. It was a device. So it didn't work. I remember that. I don't remember because I was drugged. So it was like it was weird, it was you're kind of like in this haze. So let me move on to all right, the next. There's some better pictures actually. Let's see. Well, AI. I mean, it's fine. I didn't, oddly enough, I didn't take pictures. So this, no, it's not me. It's just a generic AI idea. That is really what it looked like. That's the room. Of course, there was no window. This is underground. So there were these people in the white like lab coats, and they were dressed up like that. And then of course you had the military, and they would grab people, and children, of course, mostly in these kinds of things. So they couldn't get it to operate because see, I think it only would have what they were using for technology would have worked if it was in the biology, but it wasn't. It was weird. It was like it was struck in some kind of I don't know what I don't even know how to describe it. Like almost like interdimensional. I don't know if it would move on them or what, but they couldn't get it. So they tried a bunch of different things. I'm going to go through that. They tried to blast me with frequencies. That's why I have a really I have an issue with loud noises. I have an issue with like I remember this as a kid, especially as a kid. Low frequency sounds were like torture to me because I remember my mom would take me. I used to hate parades, and sometimes my mom, as a kid, you figure take your kid to a parade, and I hated it, and I didn't say anything because the marching bands would cause me to panic. So they would bombard me with like bass frequencies or infrasound. That's what they would use. I to this day can't handle strobe lighting or like fireworks bother me, like any sharp noise, but definitely infrasound. I can't handle infrasound. So they probably were using that. They also tried bioelectrical things because they thought maybe they could like catch it, but it didn't work. So they use these things called a frequency disruptor fields. And that must have been when they were using that low frequency infrasound. So the goal was just like extract it out of my mind. So they try to break down the higher brainwave, the theta and gamma waves. So when I access theta and gamma states, that's when I can do this. That's when I can really throw this stuff out there. This is the stuff I used to do back home on Era. So that's why they sent, that's why I had to go. I guess that's why I have to go. And that's what they were trying to grab. So they were trying to kind of, I think that's where the complication was there for them too, because they were trying to use low frequency to disconnect me from the higher frequencies and then try to sabotage it and pull it. And it just didn't work. So they were using these ELFs, low frequency pulses that it didn't work. So then they moved on and they drugged me and tied me up into this like weird dentist chair. And it was a electrical magnetic field. They figured, well, this might work. So they tied me up into this thing and they used almost reminds me of an electric chair in some ways. Yeah, they used conductors on me to try to like zap it, I guess. So they were trying to redirect energy fields by forcibly grounding them. And they try to sort of steer the frequencies I could use into a linear frequency that they could then trap or like like you think about magnets, that's basically what it was. They wanted to gather it, put it into a linear beam and then trap it, and that didn't work. So so then they tried chemical stuff to drugging me. I was already drugged. I mean, like they really tried drugging me. And some of this I really don't, this is stuff that was handed into my remembrances, whatever you want to call them, memories. Because they used neurological inhibitors. So things like DMT, serotonin, and different things that would affect your pineal gland, stuff like that. So what they were trying to do was sort of sever or disconnect the linking, the bridging between my emotional body and this energetic body, which is actually worked, and I guess in a way, because my body and I'm out of my body, which is something that semiosis would help me with to get me. I pop out of my body all the time, which is why this is because what they did worked in this case, and that it would actually disassociated my consciousness from my physical form. And most of the time I'm not really in my body. And when I was a kid growing up, I almost never was in my body. I was in two different places most of the time because what they did worked. And there's not a coherence. It's almost like my body has its own mind and my mind has a mind, and they're two separate things, which is what we're trying to put back together. And I can pop in. Like Ika's presence really helps me to pop into my body. He helps to kind of ground me. So it's very hard for me to ground because of what they did. So yeah, but we'll someday anyway keep working at that aspect. So if you're somebody who tends to pop out of body, maybe they did this to you too, right? They also try to use this thing called mimicry technology. So they created these synthetic resonance keys. So artificial AI type copies of these codes. And they would then try to store it. This was the ET tech that came in. They're like, okay, this ain't work. So they used, crystals store information, and they used ET-based tech, ET-based crystal tech to store this. So what they tried to do was capture or like bottle my abilities. Um, and it just didn't work. That didn't work either. And the reason it was like, oh God, the ETs are trying to explain to me, they're like, this psionic ability that I have, it's see that part, this is part, I guess this is part of the problem because it's organic. It's like organic AI. It's different from artificial AI. So there's a great amount of limitations. This is the problem. When you're doing things artificially rather than organically, you can sky the limit. And when you're doing it artificially, you're very, very limited. And it just didn't work. It's like you can never make artificial intelligence or consciousness biological. And this is what the small grays were hoping to be able to do, and even the tall grays. And it cannot work. No one, I don't say no one, maybe no. I don't know of any ETs that can do this, benevolent or otherwise. So what I actually ended up doing when they were trying these different things was I overloaded their systems. So I would send these like frequency pulse waves through their devices and it would just toast it. So this was, I'm glad in a way that these things started to happen. And I don't think I had control of it, to tell you that. I mean, I was drugged. So, I mean, I think this thing just, and maybe that was a type of firewall that the benevolent ETs encoded in this thing so that it would just, like, if anyone tried to remove it or extricate it or mimic it or copy it, it would react and trash their equipment. So that's actually what it did. Um, so this may be a lot of what you guys may be experiencing yourself when you've gone through some of this stuff. So yeah, Raytheon got its toasted, got itself toasted. Um, Underneath these, so in these, so you see the tunnel structures, and then there would be side rooms. There'd be storage rooms where people would be stored, the children mostly, or young people, and some adults too would be stored in these rooms. And then they were very cementy. They were like cement cell blocks, like bare, nothing in there. That's where they would store you. And then they would bring you to something similar to this. See, there's this, they all had, everyone I remember being in had an observation window. There was a one way glass where they could see in, but you couldn't see out. And then there was all stainless steel stuff. I actually don't remember any of the technology very much. They seemed like they were small devices. But it looked something, but the rooms were bigger than this. Large white rooms with that cheap lighting and all that stuff. It's kind of a weird combination of like high tech and like, junk government military tech stuff. It's like, so I think I'm going to call it for this first section. And just to remind everyone to now access as much as you can and to remember what your abilities and capacities are. Because you need to, we all want to get, like I said, we all want to get out of here. So you guys need to begin doing your job, going within yourself, not comparing yourself to other people. They're doing their job. You need to do your job. Everyone doesn't have the same job. So that's 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 the way to that's how a machine works, like your car isn't all wheels. So, that's the way you got to look at this. So you guys got to kind of do your thing, right? And cool, right? So I'll lean over here to some of the codes that we're gonna, so I'll play this. It's nice. And then and there is your code from upstairs in Tommy. And I know A lot of folks are like, oh, why don't you read it? I'll give you a chance to kind of play with it yourself, see what you think. And it's Navarishk ta inna veler nahi selena toran vida. Itina kor aliena dar shalen kuvar.